Hi there, it's Joy here again for Adventures in Menopause. And today, well actually tonight, it's like 12:30 in the middle of the night. And once again I got home from work and I'm bored and I wanted to do something. So I figured it was a good time to carve a pumpkin. I've got like 8 pumpkins to do and I've got like a week to do them. Well, a week and a half I guess. So I figured I'll carve one every night. Tonight's going to be Pumpkin Carving 101. It's going to be kind of basic. I just wanted to give some tips and tricks on pumpkin carving. And the first thing is, this is something I've discovered. If you don't want to make a huge mess all over the place, some people spread out paper towels and newspapers and all that kind of stuff. I usually just get out the garbage bag, as you can see, open it up, and I stick my pumpkin right in it. And then when I've got all the gooey bits out of the pumpkin and into the bag, I can just lift the pumpkin out, pick the bag up and toss it away. I find that's easiest. So once I've got that, I get out all my little tools and make sure I've got a variety of gadgetry, because you never know what you're going to make, and it's kind of handy just to pull out every kind of implement in your junk drawer or your utensil drawer that looks like it would make a cool pattern or cut well or poke holes or whatever it is that you might need. And I'll show you some of the ones I've pulled out. I'm not going to use them all tonight. I might use most of them through the course of the week while I'm doing my pumpkins. But first I want to say, if you bring your pumpkin in like I did, I brought it in from outside when I got home, it's going to sweat when it comes into the heat. So before you start trying to draw anything on it for your design, you probably have to give it a bit of a wipe down. Otherwise your marker won't work. And that's just temperature change. So, as for gadgets and things, I did buy one of these hoo-has from Giant Tiger. I very seldom do, and usually when I do buy it, it's for the itty-bitty blade, because it's hard to find a blade that thin, and it's good for going around little tight spaces. This one cost me $8, I think it was, and it's handy because it does actually have some of the designs and things. I don't normally use these things, but it actually does have a couple cool ones in there, so I might use one later on in the week. And the general idea is, I'm not sure what that is. Looks like it might have a marker. It does. It used to be it came with a poker. And what you would do is you would lay one of these on the face of your pumpkin and you would poke holes all the way around the design so that you knew where to cut. And then once you move the stencil off, you could see all your little holes poked together, and you just followed that. It is kind of cool because it, like I say, it's got that little thin blade. So that's the one I was aiming for when I bought it, and getting some of the other stuff is just kind of a bonus. I get one every couple of years just so I can find that blade, because I always tend to lose them or break them or something. So I might use that tonight. I'm going to get them out just to have them handy. It does have a cool scoop. It's got scrapies and everything on it. Scrapies. I'm not sure if that's a technical term. Anyway, so aside from having a good sturdy blade for cutting the big pieces and some little narrow blades, the more serrated the better, because pumpkins are pretty thick. So it's hard to get those blades through it. It's better off just to kind of saw away at it when you're cutting. It's a little easier. So like I say, I've got the serrated blades and stuff that came with it. I also got out just a basic, good sharp knife. And this is very handy. This is my grapefruit knife. This has got a little curved tip on it, which isn't why I use it. The reason I use it is because it's got a very fine serrated tip. And it's nice and thin. So I find it easy to get around corners and stuff with. I have just a basic serrated one. And then we get into the goodies. Some people use the spoons and scoops and things. What I discovered last year, it took me a long time to figure this out. What I discovered is when you're emptying out the pumpkin, and it's such a pain because there's all the little strings in there. And usually what you're doing is you're trying to pull all the seeds out with the strings in the way, and it's really obnoxious. Eventually it occurred to me that if the strings were detached in the first place, the seeds and all the strings would just fall out in one big pile. And that's what I aimed for last year. So what I discovered is, and last year, since I just kind of was annoyed with it, started hacking away with a knife and realized, hey, if I cut the strings, everything falls out. that's the way I did it. I went around the inside of the pumpkin and I scraped my knife along the edge of the pumpkin and cut all those strings, and then I dumped the pumpkin upside down. And it worked really well. It kind of looked messy on the inside, like it wasn't very smooth. This year, when we carved my daughters earlier this year, I decided I'd use this, and this is a cheese slicer, I guess you'd call it, for making thin slices on the side of your cheese. But it's got a really nice thin metal, and it's quite firm. So we scraped all those strings off the outside of hers and then dumped it, and it worked quite well. So I've got it out again for tonight. So that's kind of something like that, something that's good and sturdy with a thin metal side. Usually is good, or you could do it with the knife like I did the first time. Old-fashioned potato peeler. This is really, really, really good for pumpkin carving for many reasons. Sometimes you'll see pumpkins, if you want to get fancy, and they've done is they've cut the face or something on the pumpkin, and then they've removed the skin so the section of the face is white. You can't peel like you normally would when you're doing that kind of thing, so you can't use it that way. But it does have this really nice, fairly sharp part here that you can carve away at it with. The other thing I love this for is small circles. I don't know if you can tell, but it's actually curved. I don't know why, maybe it's for taking the eyes out of potatoes or something like that. But if you poke it in and you spin it around 360 degrees and pull it out, you usually end up with a little circle the size of your finger. It makes really great freckles and things. Or if you have some sort of design that just needs little circles through it, it's great for that. It's also really good for something else I'll tell you about in a minute. I'll go through the tools first. This is for kind of like decorative garnishes and things like that. It's got a series of small holes along the top with a sharp edge at top, with a sharp edge. And you use it when you're like zesting something. So if you've got lemon and you want some lemon zest or lime zest or something, you just kind of drag the sharp edge along your fruit, and you end up with a little curl of rind, skin, in each one of these holes. So you can also do that with this. You can do this kind of a thing if you want to make it look like it's got hair or something. You've got a series of lines. You can use this tool to get it. Did that one year, I can't remember. I think we went from the bottom up, but we didn't pull the pieces off. We just kind of pulled it up, and when they curled out, we left them there. It looked like hair. It turned out really cool. It also has this little piece, and that's for making one narrow groove in something. So you can use that. It all just depends on what kind of design you want on your pumpkin, what kind of tool you need. But if you have all these kind of little gadgets that makes all different kinds of shapes, it's easier. Oh, get blinded by something. I also have these. This is a cake lifter that my mother got me. So you cut the cake and you lift it that way. And this is for holding onions still while you cut them. But as you can see, they both have the same kind of purpose, for me anyways. And that is, they're nice and sharp. This one's obviously closer together. But they would both make really nice, straight, multiple line patterns. So if there's anything that you need that kind of thing for, again, maybe you want to do some curls or hair or something and you just want to kind of drag it through the skin to leave markings, either one of these would probably work really well. So I grabbed them. I'm probably not going to use these tonight, but I just wanted to show you because you can basically, any kind of weird thing in your cupboard might work for you. And this is something handy dandy. This, of course, is one of a set. You put it in the ends of your ear of hot corn so you don't burn your fingers while you're eating your corn on the cob. But what I discovered with this is, if you have one of these, it's very handy because if you've ever had your pumpkin and you're cutting out a piece and you can't really get that piece out, either because there's still some stringies in behind it or it's too wedged in there too tight or something, you're having a hard time getting that chunk out. That's where this comes in. You poke it into the chunk you want to pull and you book, and out it comes. It's very handy. It's just, I guess, because it's close enough together, it gets a firm grip on it once it's in, and then you can just pull out that piece without all the annoyingness. So, when it comes to designing pumpkins, there's one main thing you have to remember. You can go as plain as you want or as fancy as you want and have a really cool looking design. But the thing that you have to make sure, also make sure you always have toothpicks. I'll explain that later. The thing you have to make sure of is that it's supposed to be outside in the dark. You're not going to see really the face of the pumpkin. You're not going to see a lot of detail on the surface of the pumpkin. The only thing you're going to see in the dark with a light inside here is where the light shines through. So making patterns on your pumpkin doesn't necessarily work unless they're deep enough for the light to shine through, or if you have a light shining on it. If it's not going to be in total darkness and you can see it, great. But if it's going to be outside, you have to remember that you can do all sorts of cool stuff that might not show up. So there are ways to get around that. If you're going to do something that's, like I say, you cut the top off. You cut the top off and it's a nice tight fit. Where you cut that top off isn't going to show because there's no light coming through it. In many cases that's a good thing. If you don't want it to show, great, it's not part of your design, who cares? But you can make this part of your design, and I'm going to do that tonight. I've decided I'm going to turn this into Frankenstein because he's called it tall and skinny. So it's like a Frankenstein head. And so what I want to do is, instead of just cutting around a circle, because Frankenstein kind of always has that jagged hairline kind of thing. So instead of just cutting around a circle and then dealing with the hairline, I'm going to make the hairline part of my lid. And so now if that seam is nice and tight, you'll never see it. And so what I have to do is I have to find a way to make it so that the lid still fits, but there's light shining through where the part that I want to show up. So basically, the line that comes down here and the zigzag for his hair, I want to show. So when I cut it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to also do a second cut beside it, not to narrow the piece down. I don't want to cut straight through so that it's loose. I'm going to do it so that it's kind of a V shape. So the back of it still fits properly, but the front allows some light to shine through, and that's how we're going to see the hairline that we wouldn't see if it was a snug fit. I also want to put some 3D elements. And with 3D elements, what you do is you cut a piece out. But instead of pulling it out and throwing it away, what you're doing is you're pulling it out a certain distance and then leaving it in the pumpkin. So ears and things like that. You can cut out an ear here, and when you pull out that piece, you flip it and put the piece back in. It's something we used to do all the time. So as long as you've got the notch right so that you can fit the ear back in, the ears will now be sticking out this way. And that works great because there's also light shining from behind the piece, behind the ear, to make that ear show up. If I just take circles for Frankenstein's head things or neck things or whatever and pull them out and it fits snug, again, we're not going to see that element. You only see things in the pumpkins in the dark if the light shines on it or through it. So in order to make that work, what we have to do, and this is where this comes in again, is you take your circle, you pull it out to where you want it, and then you notch a little piece in front where you're not really going to see the difference anyways, but you take out a little piece in front, and it just has to be enough of a hole to have light shine through, and when the light shines through, it will then show up the item that you've got as 3D. So normally with a Frankenstein type of thing, I want to have my head post thingies, but I also want to have a 3D nose. He's got a lumpy, nasty kind of nose, and so I will cut out the nose, and then I will pull that out so that it's 3D, and we'll have to find somewhere around it that I can cut, have some light shine, maybe the nostrils or something, so the light shines around that nose, because if you don't make it tight, it won't stay in place. You have to have it tight. So you have to find some other way to allow some light to shine on the subject so you can see the nose. And so I will show you that later. That's where the toothpicks come in. Toothpick's very handy for that kind of thing. You can stick it wherever you want it, put a toothpick in it to help hold it. Now, the next thing that we need to know is lids. When you're cutting a lid, most people's tendency is to cut straight up and down around. Now, like I said, you can use the lid as part of your front detail. That doesn't change that. But if you've ever had a pumpkin by the end of the night and there's a candle in it, and the heat from the candle shrinks the top and then it falls in and puts the candle out, you want to avoid that. So when you're cutting the lid, you want to cut with your knife on an angle. You don't want it to be straight up and down. You want it to be angled. And that way the top part of your lid is larger. It fits snugly in the hole. And hopefully it would have to shrink the distance of that angle. So from here to here kind of thing. In order for it to fit in, for it to fall in. So you're basically resting it on the top. If that makes any sense at all. The other thing that's a good idea is to cut out a piece at the back of the lid. So usually I cut the lid out and I would cut a notch out of the lid and throw that away. And the notch is to allow the steam out from the candle. Now, this year I'm not planning to use candles because I've had a brilliant idea. But if you're doing candles, you want to have some place to let the steam vent out the top because that also helps keep your lid from shriveling up and falling in. My idea this year, I'm going to get some glow sticks. And I'm going to get the multicolored glow sticks because I want to see whether or not when I put the pumpkins out at night, if it has a pink glow stick in it, it glows pink. I think it will. I think that's going to look cool if I have some pumpkins that glow blue or pink or green or yellow or whatever. So I'm going to try it and see how it works. Anyways, on to the carving part. So the first thing I'm going to do, like I said, is I want to make his hairline part of my design. So I'm going to do the back like I normally would. I've already decided this nice flat part of his face. And it's got a few blemishes on it. You probably can't see that. Maybe you can if I put it closer. If you can see blemishes on it. I think that's actually going to add to the look because obviously it's Frankenstein. He's not meant to be pretty. So I'm not using a black marker because if I don't follow my lines exactly and there's black marker pieces all over the place, I find that a little distracting. So I'm using a pink. It doesn't show up quite as much, so I'm hoping that means if I screw up, I won't notice quite as much. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to draw a line straight down. Very messy line. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning, really. And then I'm going to do my zigzags for his hairline. And they don't have to be even or anything like that, because again, the beauty of Frankenstein is he's all lopsided and lumpy, so one eye can be bigger than the other, the nose can be crooked. It doesn't matter. It's probably better that way. So that's why I like doing Frankenstein. Also, he's easily recognizable. Okay, so like I said, we can do one eye that's like square and one eye that's round. Doesn't really matter how we do it. And I'm going to have a scar, so I'm going to cut out just some thin slivers in the shape of a scar, because again, he's Frankenstein. And then over here, we're going to have a square eyeball. My marker's not showing up very well, but hopefully it's good enough. And then we're going to do our 3D nose. So I'm going to kind of go like this. And it's kind of lumpy, it's kind of crooked. That's kind of the plan. And then when I bring it around, I'm going to have a little nostril. I think I'm going to cut out these little nostril areas here to let the light shine up to show the nose. You can do this in 2 pieces. You can cut out this piece and then cut out a smaller circle for the knob of the nose and have it kind of progressively jut out of the pumpkin. But I'm not going to bother with that because it's a little more work than I want to do tonight, just to be honest. Okay, so far we've got a hairline, we've got 2 different eyeballs, I've got a scar over here, and now we want to make his mouth. And I think I'm just going to make his mouth a little bit crooked, and I want it to go up a little farther on one side than the other. And I think I'm going to give him a tooth or 2. Alright, so that's good enough for me. Face-wise, and then I'm going to do one of my 3D ears. So this is what I do. I do this, and then you have to make a square piece, like so. These pieces need to be straight, and these pieces need to be straight, because what you're going to do is when this ear pulls out, you're going to turn it this way and fit it back in like a notch. Okay, like a mortar and tenon joint, or whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to do one of these over on this side, but I'm going to put it a little higher, because again, he's Frankenstein, so he's not even. And again, I've got a nice little straight line, straight line, straight line as a notch. And I want to put, I don't think I'm going to do the little post thingies I've been talking about all night. I think the ears will be good enough. I think he looks like Frankenstein. I think I'm all good. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do, like I said, is I'm going to cut the top out, and I'm going to do it at quite a strong angle, and I know I shouldn't be cutting towards myself. But I also don't want to cut towards you, which is silly because it's a camera, but still. Normally I get out the great big knife for this, but today I was just a little lazy with the whole thing. And I didn't dig that far. I did a pumpkin once that I was quite proud of, and it was actually a mummy. And what I did is I just kind of cut lines all the way across, most of the way around. And I left some pieces here and there, and I cut out some little strips here and there so the light would shine through. And then his whole face kind of collapsed on itself because I forgot that, you know, it's heavy. So we ended up having to lift up each crack that was where the wrappings stopped and put toothpicks in between. So it actually turned out really well. It was just kind of a one of those happy accidents where if I'd thought of that sooner, the whole toothpick thing, it would have saved me a lot of work, because trying to hold it open afterwards and stick toothpicks, it was not a lot of fun. Now hopefully, once I've got this all cut, I've done it right. And by done it right means the lid lifts off. Because if it doesn't lift off, obviously you haven't gone all the way through in one area or another. Your cuts haven't joined up, and then something is holding it in place. Ah, there we go. Looks like I did a good job. So, if you can see, this is now my lid. And it's got his little hairpiece on it. So the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of the junk. And I don't really care if it goes right back in the pumpkin, but I probably shouldn't do that, seeing as I want to show you the other stuff. I usually just make sure I carve all these stringy things off, because they're such a pain. And no, I don't save my pumpkin seeds. I don't know. I never really got into roasted pumpkin seeds. It's just not one of those things I'm big on. So this fits right back in there, which is nice. But like I said, the seam is so tight right now that you wouldn't be able to see where the zigzag is for the hairline. So in order to make that work, I don't care whether we see the rest of it, but I do care whether we see the hairline. So I'm just going to, I wonder whether any of my other tools would be good for this. Yes, that will be a nice straight one. Okay. So, what I'm trying to do here is peel off enough of this edge that it still fits, but there's light shining through. See, now I can see just a little bit of a crack, and that means if I could see it, the light can get through it. And that's what I'm hoping for. So I'm just going to kind of peel the edge, if I can, of these pointy hair pieces, whatever you want to call it. Like I say, if I could peel enough of it, the light will show through. What I really should have done is pulled out my I have a flameless candle thing that I use to try these out to see how it's going to look without having to light up a tea light or something. It's actually not working too bad, it's just hard to get into the corners, so I may have to go back the corners with something else. I apologize if blood goes spurting because I cut myself almost every time. Bit klutzy. Alright, so now obviously you can see it because of the difference in color, but will you be able to see it from light? I don't think so yet, because that one I can't see enough of a gap. So just put it back in and take a look. If you can see dark behind it, then the light will show through it. So I can see there and there and there. There we go. It's getting there. I also apologize if you hear weird snorting, snuffling, moaning noises. That's just my dog. He likes to complain about how rough his life is. But he's 14 or 15, so I guess he deserved it. He's probably earned it. Alright, so I can see all but the last one. Okay, pretty sure now that I will be able to see light coming through all the way around from there to there. So there's his hairline. So that's perfect. So I'm going to get rid of this now by putting it somewhere else. And then we're going to get out our handy dandy hoo-ha. And you don't really have to cut anything, you just have to scrape. I don't know if you can even see. You see the back wall? See how nice and clean it is? That's because I just kind of scrape down with the point of this. And because it's nice and thin and it's kind of a sharp edge, it seems to work really well. And in theory, if I get all these weird stringies scraped off, then when I turn it upside down, the strings fall out, and with the strings go all the seeds, because usually that's the pain in the bum of the whole thing, is that the seeds are attached to the stringies, and the stringies are hard to get rid of. So realize what I didn't realize, and that's that this is a blade for cutting the cheese. It's not very sharp, but if you stick your thumb on it and push, you can tell that it's a blade. Alright, so down to the bottom now, and I think I have scraped most of the way around. So, if this works, so when I do this, everything comes out all at once. Got a couple little bits I didn't get. But I think that's a lot easier still than the way I used to do it, which is sit there with a spoon trying to scoop out all those strings and seeds. And I always found it really frustrating. I just wanted to get to the part where I got to carve things. I didn't really want to deal with all the pumpkin goo. Alright, that's probably good enough. The reason you want to get rid of all the strings, of course, right, is because if you're carving the pumpkin and you go to take out a piece, the strings will hold it in place. And it loses effect if you've got a nice little round eyeball cut out, but there's all these weird stringies hanging through it. And you can see them. Alright, so that's a pretty good job. It's fairly quick and easy, right? Painless. That's the way I like it. I'm going to put my garbage somewhere else. And when I'm all done, I'll just throw all the little bits and pieces and stuff in there and toss the garbage in the garage until I need it for something else. And I don't have to deal with all the sticky gooey mess. Okay, so next on the agenda, now that we have our nice little lid, oh, that's what I forgot. I mentioned it to you earlier. We're going to cut a notch out of the lid to let the steam out. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, it just has to be like that. You can see it. There's a notch cut out. And that way the steam comes up through the notch and hopefully the lid doesn't shrink. Okay? You can also hopefully see that this is at an angle. And again, that keeps it from falling in. So now that that's done, we'll set that aside. So where do we want to start? I think we'll start with some eyeballs. Because I've got rounded pieces, I will do this. However, I really like to have something pokey because I find it easier to start if there's a hole. If there's something you can just poke in and then you can put this in the hole to start. It's easier because I don't know if you can see, the end of that is actually blunt and round. The whole thing is meant to be used is the saw part. And once you get going, it's actually really easy to saw, and it's easy to get around corners because it is narrow. And that's why I buy the whole kit. Eventually I'll have to buy another one because this one will break, but the rest of the kit I don't use. I have knives, I have other things. I just need a nice fine blade. And that is what this is. Don't get yourself into tricky corners where you can't get out either. Just stop and turn it. And it doesn't matter what the piece you pull out looks like, so you can cut into it if it's easier to make sure you've got cut all the way around. Oh, yeah, I didn't have to show you my little trick because it fell right out. Alright, so there's an eyeball. Did have a couple little strings left on it, so I got rid of those. So first eyeball done, if you can see that. And just to show you the difference, there were a couple strings on it, so we scrape those off. If you could tell, now it's a nicer, cleaner hole. So the light should shine through better. There's nothing blocking. Apparently I was talking too much and I missed a few bits. Okay. There we go. So on to our nice square eyeball. I'm going to use a bigger one for this just because I don't have any corners to go through. So it doesn't really matter. I don't want it to be totally square. I want it to be off-kilter square. So I've made one side kind of longer than the other. Okay, so this one didn't fall right out, so I'm going to use my little handy dandy and poke. Sometimes it pulls out the front, but that one did not. So here's a nice square eyeball. And he's off kilter, see they don't match. Which is exactly how we want Frankenstein to be. Now we're moving on to our 3D nose. And so I'm going to go back to my little blade because it's all curvy. But, do I have anything I can poke a nice big hole with? Is that too big? I think that's too big. So we're going to have to use our little blade. Like I said, I just want to remember to make holes where the nostrils are so the light will shine properly. Now with the 3D pieces, you do want to try and make sure that your blade is straight up and down because it has to fit back in properly when you're done. So if it's on an angle like the lid, it may be harder to get it to fit. If you angle in, then the back piece is smaller than the front piece, and when you pull it out, it'll sit kind of like it's floating inside the hole. It'll still work if you want it to, because you're going to toothpick it in place anyways, and the light will shine around it, but it's not very stable. And during the night, sometimes when things start to shrink because of the candle, those pieces will fall right out. I've had that happen. It's easier if you can just get it straight up and down as you can so that it will fit. You can saw with one hand and turn it with the other. Sometimes it works really well too. Like having your own little jigsaw. Okay. there's my nose. And as you can see, I could pull it straight out. So I did okay on the cutting part. And normally, I would have to trim it a little bit. I don't think I do. So all I'm going to trim is I'm going to trim the nostrils I've been talking about. So I have little circles drawn on here. And I'm going to try and just cut those. Like so. Again, we don't have to be even or perfect or anything because he's Frankenstein. Alright, so here is my nose. And he's going to sit like so, right? And if you could see the nostrils, the light should shine through there, just enough to kind of outline where the nose is. And all we want to do now is we want to make sure it's not going to move, so we're going to toothpick it in place. And best bet usually is to go through the top because it's narrow and you can get your toothpick all the way across it easily. So if you go in at an angle through your piece, it should go into the pumpkin that's beside the hole, if that makes any sense. Yeah, so I could feel it coming out here now. So this toothpick has gone through my piece and through my pumpkin, which is perfect. I'm going to cut that off. Alright, and I want to break this off. You don't want to see it. You just want it to... Oh, now I pulled it out. Yeah, sometimes they break off easier than other times. So, there's one. I want to put one in from the other side. This is going to be the same thing. I'm just going in at an angle through the piece of the nose and into the side of his face, beside the nose. And once I've got it in there, nice and well, here's another thing. If you're having a hard time pushing it in, and you're trying not to stab your finger by pushing on the pointy end, put the flat of something, preferably not a knife, but like a spoon or something like that, put the flat part against here and use it to push. Save your fingers. And we're going to break that off. Should probably have brought my X-Acto knife. Because, I know. Haha, I know. The toothpicks aren't breaking off very well today. I happen to have something handy dandy sitting right here. So we'll try that instead. There! Alright, perfect. Fly by the seat of your pants. So now we have a nose. It's attached at the top so it can't go anywhere. And it sticks out. It's kind of 3D. You can make it stick out more if you want. You can tilt the angle of the nose up so he juts right out. But it's basically the light shining around it that you want anyways. It's going to make it show up. So I think that worked out pretty well. Alright, so on to his mouth. Turns out for this guy, I'm not really needing any of my other tools. I get all these tools out for nothing. I'm okay with it. Is usually kind of hard to get out because it's usually jagged and it's got teeth and it's got all sorts of weird curves and stuff like that. So I usually don't worry too much about keeping the mouth, the piece that comes out of the mouth all in one piece or anything. If I need to, I'll just cut right from the top to the bottom to make a nice straight line and pull it out little bits at a time if I have to. I just find it sometimes a pain in the bum to get some of the pieces out. Gone. managed to talk enough to miss a whole bunch of strings. Okay. Put this out. I'm going to give you a close-up of his mouth. There we go. Big stringy hanging off it. So he's got some blemishes and things. It turned out he's got a couple of warts on his nose. That worked out really well. And he's all lopsided. So the last thing we need to do for poor Frankie is his ears. And like I said, that should be a fairly simple thing. Sometimes it works better than others, but most of the time it works out pretty good. We're going to cut following the line that I made. Did I give you a close-up? So there's the line. And the center piece is going to act as the notch to hold the ear in place. If it all works out. So the main thing to worry about on the ear is to make the corners of that notch nice and square. And the other thing is that depending on how thick your pumpkin is, you have to fit the ear in that space. So if when you pull the ear out, that chunk of pumpkin is thicker than that space, then you have to thin it down a bit to make sure it fits. So here's our ear. Now as you can see, the ear is quite thick and it has to fit in that little hole. So the width of this area where that notch is where we have to fit it, and it's not going to fit. So this is where we trim it to what we need. And we pop it back in there, like so. It fits right in, and it sticks out on the side. So now he's got a 3D ear, and the light will shine from this area here and backlight his ear so that it will show up nicely. Love doing those. Those are so cool. You can do this really well. My daughter won a pumpkin carving contest one year doing a 3D cat. And we did the same with the ears on the top of the cat. She cut out the triangle for the ear and then stood it up and used the toothpicks to keep it in place. The judges were very impressed. So she won a prize for her 3D cat pumpkin. Can't remember how old she was. I think she was like 9 or something like that. She was very happy. Alright. So there's one ear. I'll only put one toothpick in place because he seems to be actually pretty stable. So now it's on to the other ear. Hopefully I got them lopsided enough that he looks more Frankensteinish. We shall find out soon. And then actually I forgot about the scar, so we still have to do his scar. Alright, so the second ear is done, and again, it's thicker than I need, so I'm going to trim it. I'll cut the piece off, stick it in the hole, and now we've got two ears. I didn't get them very lopsided, but one's definitely bigger than the other, so I suppose that works too. And when I put the toothpick in, I'm basically going from the back of the ear, where is it? Can't see it, oh there. Going from the back of the ear and into the body of the pumpkin so that it's got something holding it in place. And in my case, I made the top of the ear fairly narrow, so it didn't leave me a lot of anything to poke it through. So I'm doing the bottom where like the earlobe would be. That's what I'm doing. And once I've got it in, I'm cutting off the piece of the toothpick that's sticking out so I don't skewer myself. So now we've got Frankie with his 3D nose in his ears. And we're just going to do his scar that's up on the top. Now if you're being someplace in a well-lit area, and you want to do surface things, you can do a couple little scars and things like that, and you don't have to dig all the way through the pumpkin, because if it's got some form of light around it, it'll show up. But in my case, they're all going to be outside in the dark, so I do need to make sure that I have a wide enough cut to allow the light through. So just doing a straight line won't really do an awful lot, so I'm going to kind of make it jagged. And then I'm going to do a second one beside it, so I can cut out basically a thin slit of the pumpkin, as regular as I can make it. So there's what I'm cutting out. And that should show enough light through to make sure that we can see the scar. So now we want to see the stitches, so I'm just kind of making little triangular cuts where the stitches are. And we want those again to be irregular. We don't want them looking very fancy. Okay. So I've cut out a few little pieces for stitches. Down. So this is what his scar looks like now. So the light should shine through that fairly well. So what I'm going to do, just so that you can see what it's going to look like, is I'm going to go get my little candle thing and put it in there, and we'll see how it shows up. Okay. So here's my little candle gadget. Put that in there. And I'm going to turn out some lights. So, there we go. Can you see that? I'll lift it up a little bit for you. Alright, so there's his scar showing. And his hairline could use a bit of work. His nostrils are showing up. Turn on some lights here again. There we go. Okay. So as you can see, that was a decent test, but I still have a little work to do. If I want his nose to show up a little bit better. Yes, I do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim away a little bit here and there. See if I can't get a little more of an outline for the side of his jagged nose. So this is what I'm trimming. You can choose to trim the outside piece away, or you can choose to trim some of the nose away. I've kind of trimmed a bit of the nose away. And I'm trying to do it gently because it's toothpicked in place, and I don't want to have to pull it out. Oops. Make sure that anything you cut out actually comes out, because otherwise it's not doing you any good. Okay, so I think that's going to be a little better. What else was it? Oh, his hairline. So, fit on there like that. I can see light, not very well on that one. So we'll just trim a little bit more away. And again, I'm angling it towards the front because I want the back piece to still fit really tight. It should be enough to let some light in, but not enough that it can fall in, if you can figure out where the is. All right. Let's see how that works. Start again. Oh my. Oh, for Pete's sake. There. How's he show up now? Let's take a look. I think that's better. We can see his hairline a bit better. We can see his nose. I think he looks pretty funky. There's only one thing I might want to do. I think because, there we go, because he's Frankenstein, I want him to have kind of a fierce square jawline. And the way I'm looking at him now, he looks kind of pudgy. Because, I mean, his face is rounded, right? So we don't want his face to look rounded. And since it's going to be in the dark, we can fix that. So I'm going to take my candle out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some cuts here to be his jawline. I'm creating his jawline for him. And I'm just going to make a nice straight line. I know I'm cutting towards myself again. It's a bad habit. And I've cut out a sliver. If it goes all the way through, which it seems to, that's good. So I'm giving him kind of a chiseled look. Like if you see cartoon pictures of Dracula and stuff, they always seem to have that chiseled kind of thing. So what I've cut here is kind of a cheekbone and a jaw. And I'm going to do the same on the other side, but it doesn't have to be, like I say, perfect, because he's meant to be lopsided and crooked and everything. Okay. I think I could see enough light through that. So now he has kind of more of a chiseled jawline. And I want to see if that makes a big difference in how he looks. So once more into the fray. There, okay. I like that look. He's got kind of a square jawline now. Kind of some cheekbones. A little bit of a shape to him. So I think that turned out fairly well. Not sure how well you can see it in the video, but I'm happy with him. So this was Pumpkin Carving 101. And basically what you've learned today, if you remember, is that you need to be careful how you cut your lid so that it doesn't fall in. And the best way, now people now, there's a new phase where they're cutting a hole out of the bottom and just setting the pumpkin on top of the candle. And my daughter, when we did hers a couple weeks ago, she wanted to do one. We did that. And every time you lift the pumpkin up to move it, because of course you have to organize where you're going to put it, and you move it from here to there, and every time you did that, the bottom piece of the pumpkin would fall out, and all the candle would fall out, and it was a bit of a pain. I don't know if I would try that again. I can understand if you're stacking them, because then you can kind of have the light run up through a series of stacked ones. But I don't think I would use that for mine. Like I say, I'm going to put glow sticks in and see whether I can get different colors. But back to what I was saying, you have to have your lid fit properly so it doesn't fall in, and you also need to have the little steam hole cut in the bottom. And you can make it part of your design. Quite often I'll do, if I'm doing a baby with freckles or something, I'll do a big curly cue of hair, like a kiss curl on the front, and that turned out pretty good usually. The other thing is that you can do 3D things, and if you do, you just have to make sure you have enough light coming from behind it to light it up so it shows. Anything that's a seam, like this seam here, you couldn't see it all when it was lit up because it's snug, so there's no light getting through there. You have to make sure you get light through it to make your elements show up. And otherwise, I think I'm pretty much done for the night. It is now 1:30 in the morning, so I'm going to clean up and go to bed. But I hope you have a good time, and I will be back with more pumpkin carving during the week because I have 7 more pumpkins to carve. So until then, have a good night. Bye.